and welcome back to Literally Literary. If this is your first time joining us, be sure to check out our previous episodes. This episode, we are beginning our discussion on The Ones Who Don't Say They Love You by Maurice Carlos Ruffin. In this episode, we will give a brief overview and discuss the first 9 stories in the collection.
Back and ready to talk books, not football.
That's the other podcast. You have to look for it, though.
Like and subscribe.
Anyway, though, speaking of other podcasts, this is, in many ways, a sequel because
yes.
this is one of our first, hopefully, of many returning authors. Because, as you heard at the beginning of the show, we have Maurice Carlos Ruffin, his second book.
Yes.
And we talked about We Cast a Shadow in our first season pretty early on. So if you guys want to catch up and listen to those episodes, go check them out. But we got new work. And what can we say about the book? Just kind of off the bat, off the cuff.
It's good.
Yeah.
Really into it. I was so excited that last night I texted you both saying that I was looking forward to today and that the stories were fire. I think I said something.
Yeah.
Trying to
Something
be
like
like
that.
the youths, you know. They're like
It's going to be a running joke now on the show.
I'm going to have to actually go back and listen to those episodes. So thank you for reminding me because I have not read anything else by him. Sorry to say. A little embarrassed, but I'm excited because this is what I'm starting with and I'm already like, excited about it. And I want to bring a couple of these stories into the classroom. And I already texted other colleagues and told them, like, you got to get this book. So that's my initial reaction to this collection. And we're only like 5 stories in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So today we plan on covering the first half. Did
Initial
you want to
reactions.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I love it. I was scared to approach it because his writing is just the way he writes is amazing. So I was scared to approach it, but these stories are really short, really sweet and simple. But they're tackling like a lot of really important topics. And I don't think it's like, I guess not as scary because like once you start it, like it goes by.
Yeah.
So what do you mean by scared to approach it though? Like what were you hesitant?
I'm always just scared to start a new book, honestly.
Oh, okay.
I'm like, I
Just in
think
general.
just
I didn't
the
know
task.
if it was because of the author or
I think a
what you
little
read
bit of
about
that too. I mean, I loved We Cast a Shadow. But I know that these are like, I guess, topics that I'm not used to hearing about.
Yeah.
And it was the same thing with We Cast a Shadow, I think. So with this one, I was a little bit more hesitant. Like, I didn't know what was coming. So I was like, I'm going to wait on that. And then once I did, I was like, oh, wait, these are like, obviously don't have to finish it all in one sitting, but it's easier to just read like 1 or 2 stories because they're so short.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so that's actually my initial thoughts fall in line with your guys' stuff because, one, he's a relatively new author. So, right, we wouldn't even fault any of you guys for never really touching his work. I think that is one of the missions of the podcast, though, right? Is to read new work, upcoming artists, and so when we were able to meet Maurice on a panel with Kali, we were really excited to venture forth and look at his work because they were both finalists, right, for the National Book Award, and also worth pointing out that We Cast a Shadow was also a finalist for the Penn Faulkner Award, which is one of the most prestigious I think you can get as a writer. I would say in many ways, again, going back to first impressions, I think this collection is maybe a better introduction to Maurice as a writer than we can. I mean, I really love We Cast a Shadow.
Yeah.
I think it's great. It is more dense. It's a novel. So, and I think there's a lot more commitment. I think one of the great things about short story collections is that, kind of going off of what you were saying, Vanessa, that it's digestible, the short and sweet.
Yeah.
We get snapshots of the city, right? And so we talked about this a bit um, the first time around when we were talking about We Cast a Shadow. We also had the privilege of getting to take a phone call with him. I don't know if we'll have a chance this time, but if we do, that'd be excellent. So it doesn't hurt to
Yes.
ask, right?
Hmm.
Mhm.
But one
I'll
of the
do that.
big, there you go, poke, poke, nudge, nudge.
Vanessa.
Uh, one of the things that I think Maurice, and I hope he's okay with us calling him Maurice,
I know, like
you know,
first name
right? Like,
basis.
yeah,
Like he's our
it
buddy, our
just,
pal.
I've mentioned in the show before, like when I was going to like grad school and everything, like, or not even in undergrad, you know, some of professor would be like, you don't know them personally. Like, so you use your last, like, you know, we know formally we refer to an author with their last name. And,
Yeah.
but hey, yo, we've met them. So
So is
I don't
that
know, where does that fall?
different?
That's
I
Does that change
true.
things?
don't know, but I'm sure he'd be okay
I
with it.
haven't met him, so I'm still gonna refer to him as
Mr.
the
Ruffin,
author or
the
Mr.
author.
Ruffin.
So it's on you. But also, we got a great sound clip from him. So check it out.
Mm.
This is it right here.
Literally Literary Podcast, the greatest book podcast in the world.
And then I'll insert it. Anyway, so I'll try and be brief so we can continue onwards. But one of the things that I just wanted to point out is that from getting to speak to him in previous episodes and his talk that he had with Kali Fajardo Landstein when we went to the AWP in San Antonio just before everything closed down. I know it seems so
Just flexing all over the
so
place.
long
I know
ago. Yo,
Maurice.
I don't know. Like we could talk a lot about that. We do mention it.
AWP.
I
No, I
believe
know.
you know how disappointing it was because even
Mm.
then, like half of it was like half. Like a lot of people
Yeah.
canceled, a lot of panels. But thankfully, they still did their thing, and we were able to talk and meet. And
Yeah.
one of the things that we hear from Maurice is that you know New Orleans is one of the big cities in the U.S. and it has such a rich history, a deep history, um, and even in the arts, and especially in music, right, in
Yeah.
jazz music, that you know it's kind of surprising that there isn't as well known of a literary tradition as opposed to say like some of the bigger cities, New York City, San Francisco, Chicago, like those are like big writing cities, and you
Hmm.
know New Orleans for as big of a as rich of a deep culture it has, like the literary traditions aren't quite as there, and so he talks a lot about that. You know, that's one of the
Hmm.
reasons I'm going to mention it. So,
Mhm.
I mean, one of the things that we get right off of the bat talking about this collection is that you see a lot of New Orleans,
Mhm.
Yeah.
different experiences, and just to tag off of one last thing you're saying, and then I'll pass it off because I don't want to talk that long, you know. But it's different, you know. A lot of the books we've been reading, of course, are on the border,
Hmm.
Mexican American experience, Chicano, Latino, Latina
Yeah.
experiences. And so here we get a little bit of a different look and culture,
Mm.
and
Hmm.
I'm loving that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So
I'm gonna pass it back to you because you were gonna talk about the quote, which
which quote?
by
You know
Ellis
the quote.
Marsalis. You,
Just
you know
kidding.
the quote.
Well, I was trying to be
Yeah, because
sneaky.
it was something you were talking about pre-show, and it ties into what you're saying about New Orleans being this presence and the literary. Because it does feel like a breakthrough in voices. I mean, and maybe it. I feel like it might not be. Maybe I just don't read a lot of this stuff,
Hmm.
so it seems
Right,
like
and not
it's
to say
new.
that it's not there either, right?
Right.
And he definitely acknowledges it. I don't want people listening to think that, you know, I'm saying like there's no literature, right? It's obviously there. I'm kind of just taking a cue from him when he
Mm-hmm.
talks about it in not just our interviews, but book talks, and it's obviously blooming so much.
Mm-hmm.
One of the cool
Hmm.
things that he got to talk about was like how much it impacted the community and how the community wanted to support so much. He talked about like a restaurant
Mm.
helping him out and everything, and people were
Yeah.
like lining up to get the book and beautiful stories like that. You know, the kind of people that you read about in the stories here. But literary traditions. One of the things that I liked in We Cast a Shadow is that I think Maurice has. I mean, he's definitely influenced by a lot of major authors and traditions, and so we had alluded to Ralph Ellison and Invisible Man in particular because I think that's one of my favorite books. That's also one of Jorge Gomez's favorite books. We talked about that. I don't know if it's one of yours. I don't want to, assume,
Oh yeah,
but
I don't know. I haven't read that one yet.
What?
yo, you're a literature major? Okay,
You're a
never.
college student?
No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding.
Talk to my
No
professor.
shaming. No
Talk
shaming
to my
here.
professors. I didn't pick the books. They did.
The great thing is
No,
that
you
in
have
our
to.
in our literary journeys, there are many paths up a mountain. So when it is meant for you, it'll be there. Anyway, so he does make reference, and so it's the epigraph. We have Ellis Marsalis, who is the patriarch of the great jazz Marsalis family. So Ellis is a pianist, and so we were talking about the connections with Ralph Ellison and Invisible Man. Ellison, of course, invokes Louis Armstrong, another much celebrated jazz musician, and in Invisible Man, right? The framing of it is around the question, what did I do to be so black and blue? And I feel like We Cast a Shadow has a lot of Ellison type references. Um, so, again, just going back to Maurice's style, do want to include a lot of literary references. We were talking about this
Mm-hmm.
pre-show, how great it is to discover one, and we're gonna get to that. There's more on that.
Yes,
We'll
I'm
put a
so stoked.
bookmark there. But so the quote is from Ellis Marsalis: "In New Orleans, culture doesn't come down from on high; it bubbles up from the street." And I think that this is a great invocation to these sets of stories because, we're getting a lot of voices, but he's letting us know already that it's not people up on high, right? The people in power and position, but it's maybe people more marginalized or in the margins, or maybe just not as seen,
Mhm.
or protected in society. And I think there's a little bit of blues at play here. So the fact that it's a jazz pianist quote, talking about that, it makes me think of Invisible Man's, the lower frequencies who I speak for, right? Speak for thee. Well, that's a misquote, but I'm thinking of that, and we wanted to tie a little bit to the title because we were discussing right the meaning of it, and it'd be great to ask like why he chose that as the title, and it's the first piece. But anyway, I just wanted to kind of draw that literary reference to We Cast a Shadow and to this. And I'm looking forward to exploring some of those themes, right? Because that's what the blues is. Anyway,
Yeah.
how you guys doing? I've been talking a lot, so I'm just gonna step back and ask you guys questions now.
Okay.
Ask away.
Well, no, I mean, so
We're ready.
all right.
I really like Kali Fajardo Einstein's blurb that she has in the back of the book that goes into or ties into what you were saying about blues and stuff. I'm only reading part of it, but told with humor, insight, and radical empathy, these stories will linger in your heart and mind like the fading song of a brass band, vibrant and beautiful.
Mhm.
So I'm interested in seeing like how blues or jazz or music in general are used within these stories or play a part within these stories.
Mhm.
We have seen them in a few so far, but we've only read the first 9 stories.
You can count faster than I can. It's like 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh,
Yeah.
never mind.
And it's a definite like backdrop, like New Orleans, brass bands, like the food, the culture, and all of that. It's what we know or what we think we know
Mhm.
based on what we've read about New Orleans or seen New Orleans, the tourist attractions, all that stuff, which he also talks about.
Right.
But
Even
they're
calling out like
yes, calling that out.
tourist culture.
Mm.
Stuff we're all guilty of if we're tourists in a foreign city. No, not
No,
you,
too
Richie.
cool.
Okay,
Right away, I go and find the jazz musicians. I'm like, yo,
You
show me the
would.
real spots. Just kidding.
Show me the nitty gritty.
No, honestly, though, that is kind of what I like to do is try and find like artistic looking people.
Do what the locals
Yeah.
do.
Like, where do you hang out?
Touristy spots are full of random people who aren't part of that
Exactly.
space.
And-
So it's going to still feel foreign. It's going to feel like an attraction.
It's kitsch.
Yeah. Always find the locals. Ask them where they hang out.
Good advice.
Yes.
So if you guys are in El Paso, come find me. or
We'll
Vanessa
take you to the
Reyna.
best breweries.
Hell yeah.
The best food.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the title story, The Ones Who Don't Say They Love You, I think we all agreed was a difficult story to begin with, to open up the collection with. We struggle getting through it, and I think for different reasons. It was a little jarring just with the language for me. Upon the second read, and after talking about it a little bit with you both, it was like, oh, this is what the story is about. Things that I didn't catch because I might have been reading too quickly or dismissing it subconsciously. And then it felt heavier the second time. So I'm interested in reading it a third time and seeing if I can get what he's trying to do with this story. But I don't know. I mean, I know you all felt the same about it being a dense, hard to read kind of story compared to the other ones anyway. And then we haven't finished the book, but
Yeah.
to start with, and it's a bold choice, right? Why would he start with this, and why would he title the collection after this story?
Yeah.
So I don't think we have the answer to that yet.
If I were to suggest one, I mean, going off of the quote I was just mentioning, right? Not starting with the higher look, higher view of things, but from the street. We literally go to people working the streets, right? And there's a very unique subculture that I think maybe one of the things that some of us had not issue with, but like not like initially grasping it is because it's one we're unfamiliar with in terms of a subculture. But of course, also mentioning stylistically, right? It is very jarring because we're met with a very, very uncommon point of view, right? In second person, we hardly ever get that in literature. And then on top of that, we also have a vernacular that isn't as common, right? Well, I don't. That's the wrong phrase. That's the wrong way to say it too. Like, not that it's not common, but it's in
unfamiliar.
literature. It's maybe more of like a common vernacular, or one that we're not used to reading, and so I think that part is jarring. All these aspects here, but there is a lot, right? We learn a little bit, and we kind of have the introduction of, again, speaking solely on the first half, because that's what we've read so far. I've noticed that police presence, these entities so far have been antagonistic for the most part, right? Are the main characters of each one. Yeah. So right. It is the opening story. It's also where we get our title, right? And so we were talking a little bit about what that means. The ones who don't say they love you. And of course, it comes from the relationship between our main narrator.
It's so hard to do second person. I love it though. I love reading second person point of view stories like this, especially that are so specific to a lifestyle or an experience that you aren't going to be familiar with. So it's already like, wait, but it's me, but it's not me. So it's meant to create, like you were talking about earlier, like that cognitive dissonance, right? Which we see throughout
like,
a lot of these stories.
We're asked, like, what are we reading here?
Yeah.
And before the show, I shared my anxiety with you guys about my possibility of misreading it. So it's presented, right, that they're dancing, tap dancers, right, putting caps on their shoes to dance, but it seems more so what's happening here is they're kind of sex workers, right? And so there's a specific group here, the narrator, and then you have elder workers as well that he mentions, Pink and Quincy, and it seems like there are hierarchies because it seems like they give them a lot of trouble for it. And kind of one of the main characters that interacts with our narrator a lot is Mr. Jelnick, right? And so he's a client, so to speak. And so he's kind of the subject. He's the one who says he doesn't love him, right? But that's also and this is one of our main questions, and probably one of the hardest questions of the entire book so far that we've had is, in on one end, our narrator seems young and a little naive in some instances. This notion that he's going to be taken, this man will fly him to a new place, right? And whatever that means, leave the place, right? Maybe have a better
I'll get you out of
life,
this. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Just like
I'll
a
save you.
comment.
At the same time, though, there is a little bit of, to me, skepticism and cynicism, right? And we saw that. So that whole dialogue goes around page 8, right? Where we get the title. And we were referencing the Leonardo DiCaprio meme. So I think that's going to be a staple of this show, right? Where like that's the reference. I get that reference, right?
Yeah.
Same like when the title's mentioned, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, in the middle of the page. By the way, I didn't touch on it when you read Callie's blurb.
Mhm.
The humor,
Mhm.
I love the humor that he uses, and again, through different characters' voices. I think he
Yeah.
does a pretty great job of presenting it in those different ways. So of course you have the narrator here talking about the French quarter, haha, and if it's small, it should be the French dollar, haha, and that's my kind of humor. So I was already like laughing. But it's in that same paragraph where it changes, right? Um, there's a tree outside with heart-shaped leaves. You count those leaves. You never get past 15. And all the times you've done business with Jelnik, he never say he love you. That's the only reason you listen to him at all. The other ones always say they love you. So it's not exactly the title, right? But it's kind of the essence of it. But this is where you get a sense of cynicism. And I don't know, what do you guys read from that? Like, I'm curious on your thoughts.
I kind of took it as the ones who are saying they love him are the ones that are like using him and mistreating, or I guess me.
Yeah.
I don't know how to go about talking about the character because it's
Both.
you. I don't know.
Oh.
You? Is it me?
It's
Maybe it's
me.
the universal you when
You?
it becomes.
Okay, yeah.
No, probably not.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Especially in like the line of work that we're talking about, kind of like
Something that's expected or that's just like loosely used or said.
yeah.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, there's enough sense of that, like a kind of an intuition of sorts, right? Like you said, and working in that line, and also, they do discuss like the competitiveness of it, and how these other people, Pink and Quincy, uh, can be violent towards him, right? And it's also in the end where this little bubble of an idea of him possibly being quote unquote saved, not saved, but getting to travel out of the city with this man, Mr. Jelnik, is popped. For a brief moment, you have these Quincy and Pink mocking him a little bit, like, "Oh, you really think that's gonna happen?" It's like, yeah, yeah, and then of course it ends with the image of Jelnik in the police car, which is kind of ending on that cynical blues note, right? Of the streets, because it constantly mentions like the police presence throughout this little opening story. So to end with this, ends, see where we're going, and of course, just one of many like vignettes of New Orleans. Yeah, I was listening to an interview earlier with him, and I was like,
New
"How does he say it?"
Orleans.
Because New
New
Orleans.
Orleans.
Nah, I hear New Orleans all the time.
Vanessa, you liked Cocoon. That's the next story.
Yeah.
Which is
I
2
loved
pages.
this one.
A page and a half.
Yeah.
I loved it too. Why'd you love it?
There's just so much that's being said and it's so short. And I love the way that he was able to accomplish that. There's so many strong images. I don't know. what else can I say?
So just like the premise of the story, you want to talk about that?
Yeah. So
Title, how that ties into it.
is that a spoiler?
Sure. So make
think-
sure you read the book
Yeah.
before you listen on.
Spoilers coming.
I feel like we've
Lots
passed
of
that
spoilers.
point
Oh
already.
yeah.
Yeah. No, maybe you guys have,
Richie
but not
was
me.
like at the
No,
end.
I'm already like, he did what?
Yeah. So it's about a father and a son, and their bug company, and how the son really isn't into this job, but he does it because it's something that he's able to do with his dad, and his dad is really fond of having this company with him.
But he's also very intuitive. Like it's something that his dad's like kind of forcing on him. I'm sorry to like
No,
interrupt.
yeah.
But I feel like that's such an important part because he knows it and it's intuitive to him. Even though he hates it kind of or
Yeah.
doesn't want
Yeah.
to follow in the same path.
He recognizes the importance
Yeah.
of it, as a business. But he does get a reprieve, right? It comes some help.
Tyrone, my favorite.
Oh, yeah?
I think so. I liked the line or what Tyrone says, can't stay wrapped in what you come from.
Oh,
I really
good
like that.
advice.
Yeah, I really like that.
Oh, snap. Wait a minute.
Right?
Connections.
Yes.
I mean, you also have this sense of a inner secret life our protagonist here, right?
Yes.
Well,
Starting
yeah,
process
he
of-
has hair extensions. He's wearing a crinkled suede waistcoat of his creation. He went to fashion design to pursue a career in that. When Tyrone sees him, he sees him trying on a dress.
Yeah.
So just that's all we need, right?
Yeah.
We don't need to know the
Simple human interaction of
right. It's him exploring that, feeling comfortable in that more so than the Stevens and Sons family business, even though he has a knack for it. He was able to identify like, oh,
Yeah.
I got this, I know what what pest you have in this space. And that's how the story ends is him still knowing that these things, having that innate like talent for it, but
Yeah.
pursuing his dreams and instead, which is
Yeah.
really cool.
Oh, God, for such a small amount of text.
I know.
Again, so
know,
much
yeah.
to one, thinking about the craft of a writer, the type of research that goes into it, even just looking into the descriptive elements of, well, what does this insect or what does this pest kind of create has gone into this piece. Then of course you have the cocoon, right? It's kind of I love that idea of the way Tyrone approached that whole. It must have been maybe an awkward interaction because in that brief moment he catches them trying to dress, he just moves away and doesn't come back for a long time. And when he does, it's always just kind of understood. And of course, Tyrone doesn't even change the name. So I think he's a very interesting character in that sense, right?
Yeah.
And he in his way of telling him that he kind of understands, right, is
Yeah.
holding out that like, cocoon. Like, I knew you were going through a transformation, or what a great little story, right? A little more positive
Yeah.
one. Well,
And it is so cool because I'm always fascinated with like sudden fiction, fast fiction, how you're able to have themes and all this like twists and turn and stuff in like 300 words or whatever.
and to have
How
like
do you do that?
backstories
Show
and
me your
connections
ways.
and all that,
Yeah.
right? Like we've talked about it in the past,
Yeah.
but and then I know I heard him literally today, Maurice talking about Virginia Woolf being one of his big literary influences, reading Miss Dalloway and the Hours, all that stuff, and she always talks about how when she writes characters, she imagines these deep tunnels of connections, in which they have their history and context and past, and I feel like that's really strong here in this really short snippet. Cocoon.
Do you want to talk about your favorite one so far, Richie?
This was my favorite one. No,
Well,
you
no,
called
the
me out on
next
my
one.
favorite one.
No, I said, do you want to talk about your favorite
Oh,
one?
I know. I was
Because we might have to skip a few.
Let's see. Well, I mean, I feel like if anything with Big Barrel and Still, we did draw some connections to past books we've read.
Mm-hmm.
What if
Yeah.
you go ahead?
So I kind of thought about Tomi by Kali,
Mhm.
in which she also mentioned Concrete Rose.
Mhm.
I guess also The Hate You Give could be
Mhm.
in there.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, the prison system.
Mm-hmm.
Incarceration, how it affects generational,
Yeah.
intergenerational families.
Just like
Kids,
no, at the
sons,
end of that
families.
story.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, the cycle. It's
Mm.
real.
Mm-hmm.
And how tough, I mean, so many people don't, and this is why I think maybe we love literature, but I know so many people have trouble empathizing with others. And when sometimes circumstances are beyond your control and things don't happen the right way and you end up incarcerated, it doesn't matter. When you get out, it's people have a hard time finding jobs. And I think, again, that's related pretty well, um how rough it was. And right away his car gets stolen, but like a lot of it's not under his control, and it just you feel that frustration. He's not trying to be. I feel like he's reformed, and reformed, again, quote unquote reformed, but like he's really trying to provide and
Mm.
for the family. And of course, you have the son that ends up kind of perpetuating um, this kind of association with crime by stealing a vehicle because they need one
Yeah.
because he needs to work, and it's so rough. Kind of an indictment of how sometimes we let people fall in the cracks that way, and like how hard it is for people to lift themselves up
Mhm.
once you're in these situations. I think people never consider.
Right.
Yeah.
Because of privilege, a lot of times, because of lack of empathy, like you said, just not being able to place themselves
Mm-hmm.
in that situation, like, oh, well, I would do this differently. Or it's so easy to just knock it, right? Like, oh, well, why didn't you just, like, desperate times, man. And a lot of these stories, like Ghetto University,
Mm-hmm.
it's like, okay, pandemic hit everyone kind of differently. And I kept just thinking in my mind, like, desperate times, desperate measures. Like, they had to do what they had to do, right? And there can't be any judgment because of that, because everyone's situation is different. They're just trying to understand, trying to empathize. I love that there's a lot of that in these stories. And like you were saying earlier too, we read a lot of like border stories and authors, and we immediately connect and stuff. But even this, like, set in a totally different city, New Orleans, and a lot of these stories set like way back when, there's still these themes that we can relate to, connect to, that allow us to think, what would I do in that situation? How would I act or react differently?
Yeah.
Which is
Right.
important.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we talk a lot about that kind of relativism when it comes to like immigration as well, since we're looking at different cultural things as well. Yeah. Ooh, these little stories.
I know.
Wow. Mercury Forges. Did you guys have? I think
I don't have notes for that.
You know what's interesting about that one is like I feel like there's got to be more to the name. Like if you look, I mean, obviously Mercury has a lot already behind it. I just didn't really think about it till right now. But of course, forges to forge something. He does seem crafty. It's this just really short story. To me, to put it most simply, what I liked about is it's about humanity. So you have this guard prisoner relationship.
Yeah.
I imagine it's during Hurricane Katrina. I
Yeah,
mean, they're
I
hit.
think
They
yes.
mention the hurricane. They don't mention name, but obviously that's not the only hurricane to come through. But it was obviously Louisiana was hit hard, and the reason why I was asking about his name is because I feel like maybe names are important in this one. I mean, they're important in all the other ones, probably, right? But to me, when they have to flee the prison and hide it under the bridge, and Mercury's running, it's not because he's trying to escape, but he wants to go find his dad. And You know, he says, I gotta find Humanity Street.
Yeah.
Humanity Street, like
Mm.
it's just this brief moment of where they left their roles of guard and prisoner, and they're rolling together, and his dad's gone already, but he
Yeah.
brings him back.
Yeah.
That was a nice moment,
It was nice. Yeah.
pretty tender.
Yeah. I'm not a prisoner right now. You're not a guard right now. This is humanity. We're humans.
Which
Mhm.
kind of going
Just
off
want
what
to
you
see
were
my
just saying.
dad.
Mhm.
Yeah.
These are so like they're so short, but like they pack a punch.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, Vanessa, you were saying this earlier, like reading them back to back, like we tend to do with short story collections, but these, like, I felt like I had to stop, pause after each one and just like reflect for a bit. Even though like the really short ones, like this one in Cocoon, it's like, oh, that one made me feel like all the feels.
Yeah.
Okay, I can come back to it and read
Oof.
the next one. Did we talk about humor already? Even despite like all
Very briefly.
the heavy topics, there's a lot of humor. Richie and I made notes in the margins like haha or LOL. You too, Vanessa, right?
Yeah.
He's funny. I mean, and the voices, the tone, in a lot of these stories, make you laugh, and so you're having a good time with these characters, and I think that also helps build that connection with each character in each story.
Yeah, talk about like all the strengths in storytelling, you know, appealing to our emotions, you know, in all these different ways helps so much in the strength. There you go. Pathos. You guys have anything for Cesara Pittman?
Fingers of God. Yes, I said earlier I was going to call her a bad bitch because she is a bad bitch. And I really like how she comes off in court, even though she knows that the judicial system is against her, and that there won't be justice. She still tells her story honestly, very like with pride, almost. And I felt like she was such a presence in the story, like so strong. And I was like rooting for her the entire time. And not to give anything away, but like towards the end, it takes a turn and you're like, no, that can't happen.
Yeah.
But then it takes another turn. And then you're
Totally.
like, yes, she's a bad bitch. So it's pretty great. And this is this story takes place 1866, which I really liked.
And I believe there's a historical reference in there as well for revolt. Had to look it up.
Thank you for doing that because I did not.
1866. Yeah, because she actually mentions Paul Dostie holding a white flag when they shot him. Post Civil War, you still had tensions in the way I believe martial law was called on the land. So even though they had already surrendered, a lot of the Democratic like leaders, and again, which at that point parties were still like flipped. So when we talk about modern parties, they're not the same historically. But that doesn't mean anything. But it falls in the hand of what you were saying, Rena, about like already we can tell that the odds are kind of stacked against her in this setting and in this situation. It's very clear that she had just an unlucky experience, and also she's very smart. She picked up on things. She had a test to because we have this man that pretty much assaulted her, sexually assaulted her, and was violent towards her.
Dressed like a priest.
So he was pretending to be a priest, and so she tested him in the Bible and was able to deduce that he was evil. And thankfully, she also always carries a knife with her. She mentions this as well, kind of already because of even though she's freed, right, post emancipation, you still have a lot of people refusing to accept that, especially here in the South.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's kind of mentioning the political climate there. But how am I giving it all away? I just love it,
Yeah, you
yo. But
did.
like, it's setting up.
Even though
I
I
haven't
tried
though.
not to,
No, no,
but
no, no,
that's
no,
cool.
no, no. There's still two twists though.
There are two
Two
twists.
twists, and so my thing that I'm talking about here though is this is one of the stories in the book where, you know, like a really good TV show or movie kind of makes you jump out of your seat and be like, what? Just what?
Mm.
I
You know,
know.
there's a
So
very
good.
you know, very.
I wrote,
Sometimes it's easy to
why?
feel powerless in systems. So this was an interesting way
Yeah.
of addressing that.
Yeah.
Just to
It's
leave it at
very
that.
cool. Mm-hmm.
We're speed running this
We kind of are,
because
but
we have
there's
to.
so much to say.
Bigsby.
Do you have anything to say about Bixby or Rhinoceros, Vanessa? I mean, there's a lot to be said.
Yeah.
I mean, just so in all these stories, I think Maurice does an interesting job of like pointing out different attitudes, you know, of people living in New Orleans and the complications of race. I know in Bigsby that kind of comes up a little bit, and you know, we all come from the whole like genealogy tests and stuff that are coming in now are very interesting, right? But this kind of comes into play a little bit in Bigsby, and you see a lot of microaggressions, and just like straight up like racist things. Not only here, but and a bunch of the other things where
Mm-hmm.
you know if you're black, if you're dark skinned, people are referenced to celebrities, right? Cosby is one of them, and I think the other one was
OJ.
OJ. Yeah, so things like that. Just
Yeah.
in your face like racist stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So you can read it, and again, through each story, you have different voices done pretty well,
Yeah.
like in the way they're told.
Mm-hmm.
Rhinoceros is the longest story, so I feel like we at least got to mention a little bit, right? Did
Go
you have
ahead.
anything on that? Any guys? I know
No.
you just asked, right?
I just remembered you were going to talk about hooded justice for
Was I?
the other one, but you don't
Oh,
have to.
well, I had mentioned it, so I'll just say this. You know, it is one of the longer ones, and I do think that the title again with the resolution of the story, I think tie on really nicely together because otherwise
Mhm.
it's not explicitly mentioned in the piece what rhinoceros means.
Yeah.
But when you get to the end, there's this. It's you're left with an image of what that is, what's going to happen. But it has to do, you know, rhinoceros focuses on again someone who is, I guess, not questioning, but like trying to understand their sexuality or how they
How they
their
identify.
yeah, yes. And so kind of the
Mhm.
crux is having to do with how they want to respond to incidents and of course dealing with their own incidents.
Mhm.
But really he's drawing again to like and this was why I intended to reference Ellison's Invisible Man and the lower
Mhm.
frequencies, and
Mhm.
the epigraph is you have these people who are living in marginal spaces, you know, like lesser known and accepted in larger cultural society, especially in the South, right? Where, you know,
Mhm.
you have history of slavery and plantations and religions, you know, institutions that would tell you these things are wrong. So I think by putting these characters at the forefront, you're telling more stories that we need for New Orleans. And as a storyteller, writing about New Orleans, these are important voices to be heard.
Yeah.
Everywhere.
Right.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Yeah. This is a good one. I want to use this one in class. Just because pronouns are so important right now and just all that, I think it's necessary to be able to discuss that. Yeah, I really liked it. I liked the again, it's a heavy story. There's bigotry. There's a lot of ignorance. There's a lot of self-discovery. A lot of that stuff. A lot of violence. And we see that throughout a bunch of these stories. But this one doesn't really. I mean, it's like a lot of them don't really end on with this like resolution or like closure, which I think is also important, significant, necessary. in short stories, I feel like a lot of my students are like, well, these are the stories that I'm used to, and they end with this, and you feel like, okay, it's resolved. And not every story is like that. You're not going to feel warm and fuzzy after reading these stories,
Yeah.
which makes them more real, and also something you can analyze further in a literature class, talking about that and the choices that the author's making here. I like how real these stories are. I really do.
Appreciate that.
That's probably what I like the most out of them. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the other things is those like I mean, we're reading literature that is now directly addressing the pandemic, COVID,
So weird,
virus, masking. That was surreal. I mean, read a lot of stuff online, but now we have this book here.
Yeah.
It comes up quite a bit in the stories.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of them. They're going to keep coming
Yeah,
in the next few
Rhinoceros,
years.
Ghetto University.
Ghetto University is one of my favorites.
Definitely one of mine.
Yeah.
And we're almost out of time. Dang it.
I know. Let's speed talk about this one. I think just to go back to what you're saying about like the authors, I can't call him Maurice because I don't know Maurice. Hit Carlos Ruffin. His talent just for really like hooking the reader with his voice and his tone. Especially in this one, it just grabbed me right away because of that first paragraph. I'll read the first paragraph because it's great, and you're going to want to read the story if you haven't yet. You would think a black man with 2 advanced degrees who had once lectured at the Sorbonne, who shook hands with Noam Chomsky and Shirin Ebadi, who prefers Enya to Kanye West, and who will never willingly watch a Tyler Perry film, would not spend his evenings mugging tourists in the French Quarter. And you would be wrong.
Record scratch.
Love it. Super casual. Richie, you were saying like how he was almost like cocky kind of towards the beginning of the story. He's talking about the pandemic, and you're like, okay, I want to know how he ended up here. Right. So we get that trajectory, or like we get what his day consists of. There's a lot of dark humor.
Oof. This one had a lot of great language jokes, puns, and like, and also phrases. Things like, hold on. I highlighted stuff. First of all, unselfconsciously. God, that's a great word. Unselfconsciously. What? And then I kind of had to like laugh and also enjoy feminine scrumptiousness as phrases. God, I love that.
Yeah.
It just, you can enjoy language too, right? Have fun with it. Avalanche. You know, it's great.
Quelle chance.
I'm there.
Yes, I loved it. It's hilarious, but it's also, God, like just so.
I feel like it's just the right amount of humor, like for what it's talking about. Like,
So if you want to get at the heart, right? Without spoilers, right?
Don't spoil it. There's 2 twists in this one too.
So be
You're
on the
just
lookout
like,
for that.
Oh my God. And then, again. I loved it. I loved it.
It does bring up though relevant discourse on race and public space, you know, and so I just want to draw attention to Brent Staples is an author who, you know, had written a piece kind of about his insomnia and habits of taking late night walks, in which he discusses how his presence would alter other people's perceptions of him, even though, you know, he, you know, like here, he's a well studied in Pushkin, right? Who we know is a Russian romantic writer, and you know has met shaken hands with like infamous figures. He's worked at the university. Despite that, there's this idea of like weaponizing your body and insecurity and discomfort in public spaces. So the Brent Staples piece is really interesting because he kind of mockingly says, how his presence, like I said, alters people, but like he feels that he disarms people by whistling classical music. Mozart, like, oh, they kind of calm down. It's such a very interesting connection. And so I see that kind of concept coming into play in this piece. So definitely something to think about. So if you are teaching it, maybe you can share that as like extra reading. I know students love that, right? But
I know
it's
Vanessa
definitely
was
worth
like
looking
so
into it.
annoyed with me earlier. We'll get to
Oh,
that. in a
we got to
sec.
that. No, like we're all geeking out, like, oh yes, this ties into this piece.
We have to.
Um,
What was the name of the piece, Richie? For
So
this one? Ghetto University.
Brent Staples,
Brent Staples.
yeah, Nightwalker. It's his, it's about his
Oh, I think I read it.
insomnia.
Okay.
Yeah, and actually, it's a pretty common one, I think, in composition classes to teach because it
Okay.
brings up those really excellent questions on racial identity and
Interference.
public. Yeah. Dang.
And
The other thing is, I mean, there's just like real life incidents of this stuff happening all the time. Henry Louis Gates, big time professor, was arrested trying to get into his own home. Patricia Hill Collins, getting into like some of the feminist like intersectionality of it all, right? She says, despite her degrees and everything, like in the street, she's still a black woman, and that means a lot. So just some things to think about as you're reading this piece, but of course others as well. So
there's also that scene where he spilled something on his coat and then he had to change into an oversized t-shirt and then the janitor mistook him for a homeless person
in the college, right? And
like his image, how that changed. But that reminded me of that.
When I first started
So
teaching,
important.
I was like wearing ties and sports coats and like, damn, I gotta look the part. But yeah, it's such an interesting thing, and it just goes hand in hand with like whole like, oh well, if I whistle Mozart,
the image.
let me tell you about Pushkin and his, it's like, come on. Anyway, great twist on that. Don't want to spoil that for you guys. I definitely you should experience that.
It's a good one. It's one of my favorite ones.
And the next one too, right?
Yeah. So to end our conversation today, Token. Going back to earlier in the episode, we were talking about Leonardo DiCaprio. I can't even say his name. The Leonardo DiCaprio meme where he's watching himself in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. All right, I'm already explaining it way too much. But he's pointing at himself because, anyway, you know the meme. That's what I thought when I read Token. And Token is a definite nod to Jamaica Kincaid's Girl. So if you haven't read Girl by Jamaica Kincaid, read it. And then you can kind of see how he's, using that form, right, to talk about a young Black man in, I don't know, like a white collar job, kind of, it seems like, or just in, what am I trying to say?
Not as, maybe more submissive.
Or more just more like how a young Black man should act in general,
acting
like in
proper, quote unquote proper in society in a way that is acceptable, in a way that you'll never cause
a stir
upset to the
or
status
threat
quo.
or
Like,
yeah. So there's so much in this piece, just in the title itself, but it's told in second person, just like Jamaica Kincaid's Girl is. So it's already, we're reading it like, okay, this is what I have to do. This is how I have to grind. This is how I have to look. This is how I show respect. How not to be too Black. How not to, fraternize with the other people who are working below me. Just so much. And it's so true, right? It's like alluding to this anti-Blackness with like, when you're looking at yourself in the mirror, be sure to only see a sliver of yourself. Only one of you is desirable, but more than one of you is a rebellion, right? So again, that allusion to threats. Don't be too political, too radical, right? Just under the radar.
Very, very like sarcastic as hell.
Yes.
Advice.
Yeah. Like,
Keep
you
doing
know,
you go, chimp.
you know what you're doing, but this is how you need to present yourself.
With that very diminutive, like, pat on the head.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah,
oh my
yeah.
God. So I just saw Sorry to Bother You, and there's like a lot of like similarities. Now
You've
that
seen
also
that?
is a
I've seen that.
great
Yeah, it's
critique on
good,
like
Oh, that'd be
a
good
lot of other
with
things.
to pair with
Yeah.
this. Yeah.
Yeah, hearing you describe it more, like, I'm like, oh yeah, I just recently revisited that.
It also reminded me of The Hate You Give, and like how she has
Yeah. Her school persona and then
Williamson
her hood persona.
star, and then
Yeah. Yeah.
But I'm also curious as if it's kind of based off of his own life, because he was he worked in law, I think it was before, and so he was in that.
Comes up when we cast a shadow as well, like some of those elements.
Yeah.
Wow, man, Maurice Carlos Ruffin. This has been great so far. I've really enjoyed
Can
this
we
collection.
applaud? Can we
Yes.
just all collectively?
I'm gonna be a poet and snap.
This is so good.
Can't wait
I
to
was
talk about the
looking up
rest.
that poem, "We Wear the Mask," Paul Laurence Dunbar, because when he talks about when you look in the mirror, find a mask, always a mask. It
Double
just
consciousness.
also remind me.
Huh.
Anyway.
We can answer those questions. Oh wow, yeah. So this is definitely going to spill into the next episode.
Yeah. So on the second hour,
Cue the next episode.
Do you have any final thoughts, Vanessa? Anything else?
No.
Collectively.
I'm excited to keep going. I'm excited to talk about this some more next week. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Literally Literary, brought to you by Border Senses and Power at the Pass. This episode, we began our discussion on The Ones Who Don't Say They Love You by Maurice Carlos Ruffin. Join us on our next episode, where we'll continue discussing the collection. If you haven't read it, we hope we inspire you to pick up a copy. Follow us on Instagram at literallyliterary.ep and on Twitter at literallylitep.